We're going to begin talking today on the subject of understanding or living in our authority as a believer. There is authority that belongs to you, that came from God, and that authority is probably one of the most important tools that you have in order to live the kind of life that He designs and desires for you to be able to live. That if you don't exercise the authority that you've been giving, you won't experience the kind of life. The authority is one of the most important tools you've been given that you can have that. It's very easy for us to look at promises in the Word of God and say, well, these promises are great, but it doesn't seem to work. Well, if we're not exercising the authority that's been given to us in order to walk in those things, we're not going to see them. And so we want to understand some things about how authority works. I believe there's some revelation the Lord showed me in these last few weeks as I've been studying this, that I think they may on the surface seem like very minor tweaks to the way we looked at it, but they're very important tweaks to the way we look at it. And so understanding some things about authority really determines whether we get to live that life of head and not the tail, above and not beneath. All of that sounds like it requires some authority to walk in that and live in that. That whether we understand some things about authority, we need to understand what it is. Where did it come from? What does it include? What are the limits? Who gave it to you? How could it be lost? How do we get it back? All these are things that we have to understand some things about our authority. Think about if we don't understand the authority we have, in lots of situations it poses problems. Think about whether you are either a boss or an employee in a workplace. If the employees don't understand the authority that they have, what are the bounds of their authority? What do they have authority to do and not do? They don't understand or even respect the one who gives the authority. You have all kinds of mess. You have employees that don't make a decision because they don't know if they're allowed to. You have employees making decisions they shouldn't because they think they're allowed to. Right? You can have paralysis in your company, in your workplace, if authority isn't understood. You can have frustration with employees who want to be, who are the type that like to step into authority but don't know if they can. And so we understand that from that perspective, but the way that we are designed to operate as children of God, as those who are supposed to be reigning and ruling in His kingdom on earth, if we don't understand our authority, we end up in a dysfunctional workplace. And that's not what God wants. He wants us to understand the authority we've been given. So we want to get an understanding of it. Doubts in any of these areas are the types of things that the enemy steps into, and it becomes the playground for him when you don't understand your authority. You know that you can experience this all over the place. Wherever there is a vacuum of authority, there's always somebody ready to step in and seize that authority. And it's always for their own good, right? It isn't most of them don't step in this, just wanting to help everybody. Notice that there's no authority here. I want to step in and help everyone. Now think about this. Let's bring it home, literally. If you don't have the authority in your home over your children will take that authority. Right? They will seize, not to make the home a better place. They will take the authority for their own good and for what their flesh wants. Right? And so the same is true when we don't exercise the authority that has been given to us. There is a vacuum of authority. And guess who is ready to step right into it? The enemy will step right in and take authority and make you believe it's his. And so we want to have an understanding of how he operates. You know, that we know that the enemy is a liar. Right? Do we know that? All right, so a few. It seems like every week I feel like maybe I wrote the wrong sermon because people don't know that. Okay, so now we say this all the time, that Satan is a liar. But you know that to understand how he operates, and this is kind of not just to this subject, it applies to a lot of things. He is a liar. We need to understand the difference between truth and facts. Satan will use facts to further his lies. You know that facts are not the same thing as truth. Right? Facts, You can take a fact by itself, and that is a fact by itself, but without the context of other facts, right? So the fact is you sin. So then, without any other facts around it to tell you anything differently, well, the fact is you sin, therefore you are a sinner, and therefore God is angry with you, and you can't expect anything from you. But there's some other facts. There's a fact that says by Jesus, you've been made the righteousness of God. Both of those things are facts, right? So the enemy, he'll just focus on one. So we think, well, whatever came out of the enemy's mouth, that's a lie. And that's true that it's a lie, right? And that he has, everything he does feeds to his core lie. And that is lies about who God is and who you are. And so everything, he'll be perfectly happy to give you all kinds of facts that line up with furthering his lie. So he has this lie that he's given us that we don't have authority. A lot of different reasons. We'll get into those in the coming weeks. But it's important for us to know that what he's up to. That Satan is always seizing upon these places where you don't recognize your authority, that you have authority. In fact, we're going to read here as things began in the garden, that he is always out to sell you something that you already own. He is the slickest salesman there is. That even Adam and Eve in the garden, who had no other context, no knowledge of good and evil, yet none of that yet, could still be fooled by him selling. He is selling the Brooklyn Bridge. Right? He's selling you something that doesn't belong to him. In fact, not only does it not belong to him, but it already belongs to you, and he can sell it to you. I remember watching a documentary about a movie. It was an old Robin Williams movie where he was a used car salesman. I can't remember which one it was, but they're interviewing him. Yeah, okay. So, but he was talking about training for it and spending time with used car salesmen, which had to be a lot of fun. And but he's talking. They trade their stories about how they could sell somebody a car. One of the guys says, "Well, I got you all beat. I sold a car with a manual transmission to a guy with one leg." Right? That's what Satan does, doesn't he? I'm not saying if you sell used cars that you're Satan. I'm just not quite, because there's only one Satan, but but you know that there is that Satan is always trying to sell you something that if you don't understand what's already yours and what already belongs to you, he'll sell you a counterfeit, right? He's selling you the knockoff that is designed to destroy your life. And so we have to be careful in knowing what he's up to and what he's doing. So let's go see what he was up to and what he was doing in Genesis chapter 3. And at verse 2, right, so it said that the serpent, he was cunning and crafty, and he came and he has this lie, he has this question he poses, where he said in verse 1, "As God indeed said, you should not eat of every tree in the garden." Now verse 2, "And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you should not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die." Right, so he started off, the first lie is to call God a liar. "For God knows that in a day that you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took its fruit and ate. She also gave it to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So there was a lack of knowledge of the authority that they had, and Satan comes in and convinces them. And so let's get into what I mean by this. Remember I said one of the things that's important in understanding authority is knowing who gave it to you. So where does Satan come in with his attack here is to question the validity even of the one who gave it to you. Right? He's going to attack it right at the root. You think you have authority, but what do you really have? Because the one who gave it to you is a liar. You know, if you can't trust God, then you're going to be pretty hopeless. Because then what authority do you actually have? if you don't trust who God is. He comes in and does the classic, oh, let me tell you what God's really up to. Right? When someone comes to you and wants to tell you what somebody else is really up to, that's usually a good sign to go, yeah, I don't need to hear that. Let me tell you what they're really up to. What's God really up to? Well, he's just trying to hold you down. He doesn't want you to be like him. So he knows as long as you don't eat that tree, you won't be like him. So he was bringing this lie to question the authority giver. Right? We can look at how things are in our nation, and I promise I'm not going to get political. But let me put it this way: we understand what is what was said by the founders at the Declaration of Independence. Right? We learned all these in junior high, right? We hold these truths, hopefully you still learn this, to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Well, the problem we have is we have a society that keeps minimizing and questioning whether there is a God, who he is, what he's about. And so if you question the authority giver, then what is the authority worth? And so then what does man do? We think, well, we don't need God, but we'll create equality. And we'll create life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And guess what happens every time man thinks he can do what God's supposed to do? We make a mess, don't we? And then what was our answer? Try to fix it some more. Well, that didn't work. Let's do it some more. And let's make more mess. That we have to understand the authority giver. When you understand who that is and where it came from, now you have a hope and you have a foundation. We understand our authority was given to us by God. He's the authority giver. That God is love. So Satan's lie was that there's some evil motive to what he was doing. Right? Because that's the way we think. We look at other people. Anytime anybody's doing something good, well, what are they really up to? What's their real motive? What are they really after? But that we have begun, because of knowledge of good and evil, we think, we project the way we think onto God and think he thinks that way. But we have to understand is even we can have no hope in any man on earth, we know we have hope in God because he's not like man. He doesn't think like we do. He doesn't operate like we do. He is love all the time. That's who he is. All right, so understanding that we have that authority, that Satan comes, he wants us to question who God is. I want to just to pause for a second here. When it says, I teach this often and say that, that knowledge of good and evil, when they ate of that fruit, it says that their eyes were opened. And so what was it? What was the knowledge of good and evil? But it wasn't that they knew about good things and now they know about evil things. And their eyes were opened up and now they know about evil things, and that's the problem. No, the knowledge of good and evil was that they would know, man could know and discern good and evil. God tells us what's good and what's not good. Well, pastor, certain things it's obvious that's good or not good. Well, that's fine, but we have issue as man that we think we know. Now, look what happened here. It said that if they ate of it, that their eyes would be open and they would know good and evil. So then when we read what happened when their eyes were opened, they immediately were ashamed, covered themselves, and hid from God. So that tells me what the knowledge of good and evil does. The knowledge of good and evil tells you that there's something wrong with you. It tells you that God has it causes you to doubt God. There's something wrong with you, doubt God, and I need to fix it. That's trouble, isn't it? There's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with God, and I have to fix it. That's a hopeless situation. And that's what knowledge of good and evil did. And it's the type of thing that once that's been opened up and you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Right? It's like the big, hairy 70-year-old guy in a Speedo on a beach. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It's impossible. Right? There's things that mankind, once his eyes were open to that, he can't see things from that pure perspective that he saw them before. And that's why we all get stuck in that same trap. That we're all born with that same mentality. I don't care whether a person is religious or not. Everyone operates on this whole check and balance system of the good and not good. And I judge me, or I judge other people, or I judge everything based on these things. It is a knowledge of good and evil. That there's always something wrong with me, there's something wrong with you, and there's something wrong with God. And so it's important for us to understand what Satan was up to. He was attacking almost every one of these things I said that we need to understand about authority. He is attacking them all at once. Because I'll tell you what, he may be defeated, but he's not dumb. Right? He's sly. It said in that first verse that we didn't read, right? He was crafty. He knew how to do things. He knew how things worked. And so he was attacking the authority we had. Now, next week, we're going to look at how the authority, because we understand that through that fall, the authority did on this earth transfer to Satan. But I'm going to tell you, one of those little tweaks is it didn't quite necessarily happen the way we may have thought it happened. But it did happen. And getting understanding of that is going to help us as well. But we'll get to that next week because I don't have time today. Let me get over now to Romans chapter 5. This whole mess came, and it really wasn't because, we read there that part of the story was focused on Eve. But all of our problem came once Adam ate as well. I'm going to throw this out there, and it's not critical to today, but it's going to be in the coming weeks. That Eve was deceived into eating the fruit. But Adam was not deceived. He made a choice. She was deceived, and Adam made a choice. That's going to be important, so file that there. It's going to be important to where we get to Jesus, because it ties in what we're going to read here in Romans 5, but from a different angle. Romans chapter 5. Grab my little glasses here. Romans 5, verse 12. So what we just read, this loss of authority, an attack of man's authority. And so let me just tell you, so what's the authority? Maybe you don't know how things went. Before that fall, God tells man that you have authority over everything on this earth. Anything on this earth, any of the creatures, the earth itself, the trees, the fish, everything, you have authority over it. Now, so let's get into one of those questions. So what do you have authority over? Everything of the earth. What do you not have authority over? Other people. Right? God didn't create you to have authority over another person. He's not a respecter of people, or not a respecter of persons. He doesn't put you in authority over other people. Now, I understand there are positions and things like that. That's within man's systems. But God did not design us to rule other people. That's another way we got in trouble. But didn't God set up kings? Only after they begged him. They came to him in the days of Saul and said, hey, we want a king. All the kingdoms around us, they have kings. We have this invisible king, right? Nobody believes our king. It's sort of like they treat us like I have the girlfriend in Michigan that nobody can see. No, she's really, really beautiful. There's a picture of her right here. That looks like it's out of a magazine. Yeah, she's a model. So we can see her. No, she lives in Michigan. Right? They had a king that lived in Michigan. Right? They wanted to have a king, so we want a king. But God says, I want to rule you. But we want a king. So God says, okay, if that's what you want. But let me tell you what's going to happen when men rule over men. Here's what happens. Right? That he's going to steal from you. He's going to send your sons out to fight his wars. He's going to take what you produce. That's what's going to happen. Isn't that always what happens when men rule men? So it isn't what God wanted, but it's what man wanted. And they begged him, so he said, okay, you can have this. And you know that even through that, you're like, well, why did he even relent and do that? He used that process to eventually bring Jesus. Even man's stupid decision, he used to eventually bring Jesus and set everything straight. Okay, so understanding some things about how this works. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world. So it's talking about Adam, because it was Adam's the one who made a conscious decision. He wasn't the one deceived. He made a decision. So just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. So, Pastor, what are you talking? This is sin here. I thought we were talking about authority. We have to understand what's the definition of sin. Sin is anything that falls short of God's best. God's plan was, I equipped you to rule and reign on this earth, and because of what you did, you messed it up. You could also read this way, is to say, therefore, just as through one man, the mess entered the world, and death because of that mess. Well, Pastor, are you just minimizing sin? There he goes. It's just one of these grace churches, they just minimize sin. He just called it a mess. Well, it is. That's what sin is. It's a mess. God didn't want us to live in a mess. That's why he told us to do things a certain way, because he didn't want the mess. But once that entered the world, once that mess got in the world, you couldn't put it back in the box. Right? It's like when you unfold nobody even uses a map anymore, right? Remember when you unfold a map and you're like, I'll never fold this ever again. It's just kind of mangled, and then you just ball it up and shove it in a glove box. I think that's one of the greatest inventions. We don't need that anymore. Right? Once it's done. So it entered through one man, and then death came in the world. The death came in the world because once man thought he knew how to do things, we messed up even our physical bodies that God created that were supposed to be eternal. We even messed that up. Without the spirit that was originally there before man fell, we would have lived forever. But we messed that up too. So death came. Now it says in verse 13, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. Okay, so sin is not imputed where there is no law. So what is Paul writing about here? He says, okay, so there was this time, I'm sure some of his readers may have been thinking, okay, so there was man in the garden. Now there was one rule, just don't eat of that tree. That's the only rule. And we couldn't do it, just one rule. So things are messed up. And now without the Spirit, we need some more direction, some more rules come. But you know that there was no law then until the days of Moses. We're talking a couple thousand years later. There was no law. So it says sin was happening, but it said sin was not imputed where there was no law. Meaning it wasn't being accounted to or assigned to. For sin to be imputed to you, it means, okay, there was a witness, you did that. It's assigned to you. You did that. But he says where there was no law, there was no sin imputed. Now sin was still happening, but it wasn't assigned. But then there is the time, but then the law came. And when the law came, now sin was imputed because you were told, it's been recorded, you're not supposed to do this, and you did it. It's assigned to you. But how many know that now we've been redeemed from the curse of the law? The law has been put aside. Sin still happens, it's not imputed to you. It's not assigned to you. Doesn't mean you don't still make a mess. You still make a mess when you sin. But it's not being imputed to you, not assigned to you, added and credited to your account when you sin. That's an important thing. It's here in parentheses, but it's really important. It says, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, right? Even though sin wasn't being imputed. This is one of the important things for us to get, because he's going to say in the next chapter, which we're not reading today, but you take everything he just said and go, okay, so that means we should sin more because we'll get more grace. And he goes, no, that's dumb. Don't do that. Right? Because just because it's not being imputed to you and assigned to you doesn't mean you're not still making a mess. Okay, so he says, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, which then tells you that the death that came because of sin was not God punishing man because he sinned. Right? That sometimes it's misunderstood that when God said, well, don't eat that fruit, and when you do, you'll surely die, that the death was a punishment for eating of the tree. But when he said there was no law, so sin wasn't being imputed. So that means if death was happening, it wasn't coming from God for punishment for what they'd done. Because the sin wasn't being assigned. But even though it wasn't being assigned, death was still happening, wasn't it? That tells you that God is not the one behind death happening. Another way of Paul saying death happened. Isn't God doing this? It's just the result of sin happening. Okay. even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who is a type of him, capital H, talk about Jesus, who was to come. But the free gift is not like the offense, for if by one man's offense many died, much more the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abounded to many. Somebody say abounded. Right? It abounded to us. When things, right? Sometimes in life we get things in abundance that you wish you didn't have in abundance. Right? But this is something that's good to have in abundance. An abundance of grace has been given. Right? What does that mean? That no matter what you have done or ever could do, there is enough grace. There's no shortage. There's nothing that you could do that God would say, well, that was a pretty big one. Sorry, that's a little too much. No, the grace abounds. There's an abundance of grace. Now, verse 16, all right, so, and the gift is not like that which came through the one who sinned, for the judgment which came from one offense resulted in condemnation. Right? As soon as they ate of that tree, it said their eyes were open and they felt condemned. That law, so there was the actual law that came, but knowledge of good and evil. I know what's right and wrong. Immediately, again, there's something wrong with me. I feel condemned. It says that condemnation, but the free gift, which came from many offenses, resulted in justification. For if by one man's offense death reigned through the one, much more those who receive abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ. So one person messed this whole thing up so that we had an authority problem. There was one. You know that as long as, and to reflect on what I said earlier, now pull this together, as long as there is a man who has the authority. See, as soon as that knowledge of good and evil came, man questioned if the authority was even valid, but if it is, am I qualified? Look at me, I'm naked. I gotta cover myself. I did what God said not to do. I've probably lost my authority. This is the game that Satan's playing with us and wants us to question and doubt our authority. But as long as there is one man who has the authority, and that's Jesus, even in our knowledge of good and evil, backwards thinking, Jesus couldn't have lost his authority because he never sinned. It's important that he came as a man. He came to earth as a man and did what all of us couldn't do. And he maintained his access to the authority. As long as we have hope that there was one man who did it, and that he said, because of what he has it, that I have it. I have hope, and I can believe that I have authority. But if I doubt any of that, then I don't believe I have authority. There may be times where I think I have authority, but as soon as things get tough, the enemy is there, remember, with his facts, to tell you, appeal to that. See, that's why he wanted them to eat of that tree, because once he had us in a knowledge of good and evil spot, he knows exactly how to get to us. There's something wrong with you. You failed. That authority is for some who didn't sin, but you did. So who do you think you are to claim that on that authority? All right, so I want to take you over to a picture. I'm going to say today is really kind of an overview of a lot of things we're going to talk about in the next few weeks. Go over to Deuteronomy chapter 28, and let's see what the life of one with authority is supposed to look like. There's some stuff in here to get pretty excited about. Deuteronomy 28, verse 1. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God and observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Now, so some pretty exciting things are coming here, but I know what you're thinking. There's twice that it said, if you want this, you're going to have to fully obey. Well, I'm out. Right? It's, the one, I can't find that tree, so I know I didn't eat that. But among the 10, I probably messed up on some of those. And then there's 613. I don't even know what all those are. I know there's something. I'm sure that whatever I ate for dinner yesterday didn't qualify. So I know I didn't fully obey, so we will, knowledge of good and evil, disqualify ourselves from all this stuff that's about to come. But you know why he made it so important for us to know how the whole fully obey thing goes, because he knew we weren't going to. That's why it's so important that Jesus came and he did. And that he said that if you will believe in me, whatever is mine, it's yours. Whatever belongs to him belongs to you. This is how God made it so that we could have the blessing that comes with having authority. So we're going to read. I want you to think about these things we're saying. These are things that will happen when you understand the authority that you have. Verse 3, blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, not herds. Right? Because what is it? I know it's like an England thing. They say herbs. Does that bother anybody else? It bothers me. I feel like there's people who've like somehow teleported through some portal from an alternate universe where herbs is the way you say it, and where toilet paper is supposed to go over the back instead of the front. And in their world, that's perfectly normal, but in our universe, that's not right. It's the fruit. Increase your herds, not your herds, and increase your cattle and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in. Blessed shall you be when you go out. Okay, so what is he saying? There's blessing. What is blessing? It is equipping. It is the resource to run the race that he has for you. It is an anointing or a power, the authority to go do what he places in front of you. It is the authority over whatever would come your way that would stop those things from happening. Right? Blessing is the equipping for whatever he has for you in your life. You know that some of you have some pretty big dreams for some things that you know that God has placed in your life to do. You have dreams to build big businesses. You got dreams to build world-changing ministries. You have these things in these dreams, but you wonder, how would I ever do that? I can't even get a loan for a car. How am I going to do that? But you know that the blessing that was given to you is God's telling you, with the authority I've given you, you are equipped to do those things. Through Christ, he has already equipped you. He's already given you everything. You're like, well, I'd like to see it in my bank account, but that's okay. Right now, what you're going to do is you're going to trust him and know that he has done this. It is available to you. And just because you don't see the dream today, you keep working toward it. Right? I can't go build I'm not ready to build a massive sanctuary here to seat everybody in our city. I don't know if that's my dream, but I'd like everyone to be saved in the city, so I guess so. Right? I'm not ready to do that right now, but I know when it's time, God's equipped me, and it's going to happen. Whatever dream he's dropped in your heart, he's already equipped you for it. But you got to understand there's some authority that's been given to you to walk in what he's done. And this blessing is that equipping. So you've been blessed wherever you go. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise up against you to be defeated before your face. It isn't up to you to defeat your enemies. It's one of these things I've learned from pastor mentors of mine. And as much, it was very easy to hear it for years. And it's sometimes more difficult to actually walk in it when you have to. But I don't worry about what people say about me or trying to debunk what somebody says wrong about me. The Lord will take care of my enemies. I just stay focused on what he has me doing. Right? That he will. I don't have to attack and go against any of my enemies. It says, they shall come out against you in one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your storehouses. Okay, modern vernacular, in your accounts, whatever it is, where your resource is stored. That he is called blessing upon that. And to all which you set your hand. Right, whatever you set your hand to, sometimes that's the problem. We need to learn to set our hand to some things. We think about them, we talk about them, but set your hand to them. When you set your hand to it, there's some blessing that follows. It says that he will bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, just as he has sworn to you, if you will keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. Then all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, which I could use less livestock in my house. Maybe I've been confessing this too long. Too much livestock in my house. Okay, so there's a difference I've learned between dad jokes. Of course, now I have my classes as pastor jokes. And then there's grandpa jokes. I think grandpa jokes are like above even dad jokes. So I'm sitting, so it just made me think of this. I forgot where I was the other day. I was sitting, I think I was waiting for something to be done on my car or something. And I'm hearing some gentleman over here who was a grandpa sitting here talking with some people sitting around him, and he was telling the jokes whether they wanted to hear them or not. And I think that's the difference of grandpa jokes. Like sometimes even as dads, we realize that people don't want to hear our jokes, and we know better. When you get to the grandpa stage, you just tell them to everybody. And so he said this. He said, let me ask you a question. Do you know who the all-time world's greatest financier is? And so he'd been telling some kind of, Bible-related jokes, and my mind goes, I'm thinking, well, like people like Joseph or Solomon. He says, no, it's Noah. Why? Because his stock was rising while everyone else was going under. All right. And in the produce of your ground, the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you, the Lord will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not beneath. If you heed the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and be careful to observe them, so you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day to the right or to the left and go after other gods and to serve them. That last part is really the most important thing. That for us, we know, I'm going to produce things, all these things are going to work a lot easier if I do all the right things. I make the way a lot smoother when I do things the right way. But we understand there's going to be times that I don't, but it doesn't disqualify me because Jesus did it for me. He did what I wasn't going to be able to do, because if you go read the next verse, which, it's okay, go read it, you find out what he says, what happens if you don't fully obey. Then all these curses start to come on you that are all exactly the opposite of what he just said. And so out of that knowledge of good and evil that we were born with, that we struggle with, that we're always trying to overcome, that being what was painting everything we look at. Our knowledge of good and evil would tell us, and we begin to identify with the curses. Go, see, that's why that's happening in my life. Because I've made mistakes. What authority could I have? Because I don't fully obey. But Jesus did. God knew that we couldn't. It's why he wanted us to know we are joint heirs with Christ Jesus. So Jesus did this for us. And he has ensured that we have the authority that's his. See, if we are still questioning, well, I don't know if I have authority, because let's just be honest, I've messed this up, and this problem, this is because of my mistake. I did this, and now I have this problem. We question whether we have authority, and he wants you to know, no, you have authority, because Jesus has authority. And that's the thing we have to continue to ask ourselves when we are questioning whether I have authority in any situation. Do I have authority over this? Does Jesus? If Jesus does, then I do. Yeah, but, and then there's the knowledge of good and evil voice will be right there. Yeah, but. No, I don't want yeah, buts. The only thing I need to know is Jesus, does he have authority over this? Then I do. You know, when we begin to look at the systems, so we'll talk more next week about the things we have authority over. I have authority over the systems of this world. You know, that God blesses me whether CNN says the economy's good or it's not. Right? Whether Fox says the economy's good or it's not. Or Bloomberg says it's good or it's not. It doesn't matter. I don't care what your flavor is. Right? That I have authority over the systems. That, I don't know, would Jesus have authority here? Then I do. It's the things, the resources of this earth, the things that are needed. There shouldn't be anything keeping us from the plans that God has placed in our hearts. The dreams that he's placed, the things that he's promised us. If you're not seeing them in your life, don't get condemned, because that's what the enemy wants you to do. What's wrong with me? Why am I not experiencing that? What have I done wrong? That's what he wants. The other thing, if he can't get you there, he'll get you just in the blame game, is saying, I don't have because of them, and they did this, and they did that, and they've done this to me. And neither of those things are going to get you where God wants you to be. Now, what we have to connect to is he gave me authority. And he gave it to me through Christ Jesus, and it can't be taken away. And I'm going to take my authority over this situation, over this circumstance. Amen? Amen. If you got anything out of that this morning, give the Lord a hand.